Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. You're here at the Humanists of Greater Portland meeting, and I want to just welcome everyone here. We got quite a nice crowd for our in-person presenter, and also a good crowd, over 25 people at our Zoom meeting, so well attended. Our meeting today will be recorded and archived at the Humanists website. We have over 10 years of archived programs on that website. If, for those of you that have been members for a long time, it's a really great way to see yourself younger. We were, yeah, we were pretty darn cute back then. Not that we're not now, but you're here at a humanist meeting, and to define humanism is a philosophy or informed by science, inspired by art, motivated by compassion. It affirms the dignity of all humans. Humanists believe that this is the only life of which we are certain. And because of that belief, we attempt to live the best life we can envision for ourselves. We do this for ourselves, our family, our friends, our fellow humans, and all the other living creatures with whom we share this fragile planet. And today's program, Here Together, 2023's roadmap, immediate steps to address the Portland region's homeless crisis, especially addresses those commitments of empathy, service participation, and social justice. I really love the first Sunday meetings, so we always have music. And Pete and Paul, I'd like to invite you back to do another number. What are you going to do for us today?
Our good friend Sylvie from Kansas,
yes,
who's Zooming with us,
yes,
requested this. She's been a friend for 50 years.
Well, thank you.
This is one of the first songs that we wrote. And up till about 10 years ago, I could sing it. We'll try it anyway. Okay. Morning's here on the shoulders of the sun, standing high, look at me in the eye, go fetch my armor. Watch your Ivanhoe joust in the hippodrome. I can be what you think you are. I am.
Thank you, and that you wrote that song. That's amazing. Right now, though, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Anna Kemper. Anna's here today to there we go. Anna's here today to represent the 250 plus members of the HereTogether coalition of businesses, service providers, and community leaders that came together to develop the coalition's 2023 roadmap, which is a series of actions to address homelessness in this year ahead here in Portland. We're going to have a lot of questions, so all right, let's give it a check. Anna, welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you. I can introduce myself, maybe well? Okay. Well, nice to meet you all. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Anna Kemper. I use she, her pronouns. I am the communications manager at HereTogether. I've been at HereTogether for a little over a year and a half now. And previous to HereTogether, I have a background in climate and housing organizing. So I come to this work with an organizer background as well as a policy background, and I'm doing our communications. I'm very excited to chat with you all today. As we know, homelessness and housing insecurity are potentially the #1 issue in the region. And so the communications piece that I do feels really important because we're trying to talk about solutions and get that information out to the public. And it's a complex issue. I'm going to try and talk about that today, break it down a little bit, but trying to distill some of that complex information and get it out to the public is a big piece of what I do. And so I like doing these kinds of things because we can really get into it. But a lot of my work, is newsletters and blogs and social media, so kind of having to make it more simplified. So anyways, I'm excited to be here today to talk to you all and get into it. Sweet. All right. So, as we already discussed, HereTogether is the 250-member coalition that helped pass the Supportive Housing Services measure. And just for a show of hands, before today, how many of y'all knew about the Supportive Housing Services measure? So just a few. Yeah, the measure, so that it's a tax that's paid through folks who make more than $125,000 a year individually or $250,000 combined, and then it's also a tax on businesses. And so this is a historic piece of funding. It's $2.5 billion over 10 years. It's the biggest per capita tax to provide homeless services. So 2016, 2018, there's these big affordable housing bond measures that were passed. Those are great. We knew that we needed more than just the brick and mortar in order to address the crisis. And so SHS goes specifically towards services. So caseworkers, addiction and mental health treatment, job training, affordable housing vouchers, and I'll get into more of that, but that's kind of just the background. And again, we are a big coalition. We have folks from the business community. We have folks from all corners of the Portland metro region, faith leaders, service providers, community advocates, folks who have experienced homelessness. So it's really exciting for me to work in such a big, broad coalition. And yeah, so today we're going to be talking about our 2023 roadmap, which was developed by experts in the coalition in order to break down kind of action items of what we can be doing to address our region's housing and homelessness crisis. Okay, I'm going to try and see if this works. Oh, sweet. Great. So HereTogether knows that we need an all of the above approach. No two people become unhoused in the same way. Folks, no two people are the same. So we need a lot of options to support people individually. The goal is always getting folks into housing. Shelter can be a part of that. Shelter, we know, works best when it's temporary, trauma-informed, but we need all three of these things, shelter services and affordable housing, in order to address this crisis. So I wanted to start this presentation off by grounding us in the numbers. The point-in-time count is a federally mandated count that happens in all cities across the country in order to get a snapshot of who is unhoused and why. This number is from 2022. It's one night in January. And so just want to start us off by saying this number is across the board known as an undercount. It gives us a good idea of a snapshot, again, like I was saying, but it specifically doesn't count folks who are couch surfing or in a hotel or staying at a friend's place. It specifically looks at people who are on the streets and in a shelter. And the other thing I wanted to be clear about is we're not talking about numbers today, we're talking about people. These numbers are real people, literally folks who are on the street, and just also being clear that shelter doesn't end someone's homelessness. Again, it's an on-ramp into housing. In fact, if someone is in a shelter, they are still defined as homeless by HUD. Okay, so some good news. We now have more resources to address this crisis than we ever have before. One thing I wanted to make very clear is that homelessness is a decades in the making crisis. Disinvestments at the federal level, especially in the 80s, have led to what we're seeing today. And for the past 40 years, service providers and in the Portland metro region have not had the resources they've needed in order to really address this crisis. So on the far left here, these are the investments by each county previous to the supportive housing services measure. Can especially look at Clackamas. Like, we've been able to really ramp up the amount of resources we've had. That middle column there is specific SHS investments from this last year. And then on the far right, that's total. So that's all the funding that people have been, sorry, say that again? That's the supportive housing services tax. So I'll reference SHS a lot in this presentation, but again, it's always referencing that measure that was passed in 2020. The money started coming online in 2021, July of 2021. So we're now going into we're finishing out year 2 of the measure right now. So again, just historic amount of funding that we've been able to now are finally addressing the crisis with. The number that you can't see on the far right there is 296.2 million total investments across the metro region as compared to 110 3 years ago. All right, so let's talk about what's actually happening with that money, because that's what I think we all want to know, right? I'm gonna move one thing really quick so I can see my screen a little better. Okay, so so all these different pieces. So this is specifically also with just supportive housing services funding. So that middle column on the last screen, we've been able to move over 2,000 folks into housing. Almost 10,000 families have received eviction prevention services to avoid homelessness. And we've ramped up with just SHS funding to almost 1,000 shelter beds created or sustained, again, in just the last 2 years. And we've also provided a lot of job training opportunities for folks. One thing before I go any further that I want to just re-emphasize that I realized I didn't say off the front is that HereTogether is not a government agency. We are a nonprofit. We do not get any funding from supportive housing services. We pushed really hard to get this measure passed, and now we work to hold the counties accountable to actually get this money out there. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the counties today. We're looking at, okay, what are the wins and also what are the roadblocks with this funding? Because it's a lot of money. How, how are we spending it? So I just want to get that out there as well. So one other thing that I want to point out that I like to bring up at this point is that last year, with all the funding that Multnomah County had for homelessness, again, on top of SHS, over 4,500 people moved from homelessness, from the streets or a shelter into housing. So thinking about that point in time count, right, that's a lot of people. And you look outside and you might not really believe that number, right? And so what is that? So one thing that we have to grapple with when we're talking about homelessness is the inflow, folks that are becoming unhoused every single month because of evictions. And so that's why that 9,000 number is really important, because the best way to end someone's homelessness is to prevent it in the first place. It's a lot cheaper to keep someone in their housing if they're housing insecure than trying to move someone who's already in a tent into shelter and get the resources they need, because that person's been traumatized. They have been through so much, and the services they need are probably going to be a lot greater than a rental voucher. All right. I'm almost done with a little bit, and then we'll pause for questions. So I also wanted to point this out. The amount of shelter capacity, 2015 versus 2022, in the last 7 or 8 years, Multnomah County now has over 2,600 beds. Those are both emergency beds and year-round shelter beds. In 2022, over half of the Joint Office's budget was dedicated to expanding and operating shelter. This is money that's on top of SHS. So this is SHS funding as well as other homeless services funding streams, but it's a lot of beds. And so again, shelter works best when it's temporary and trauma informed and an on-ramp into housing. I just like to point this out because I think folks don't know how many shelter beds we actually do have in Multnomah County. All right, so one question we get a lot is what is happening at the state level and how things will be different now that we have a new governor. So on the first day in office, we saw Governor Kotek make 3 executive orders. It's ramping up housing production, creating a homeless state of emergency in urban areas of the state, which gives the state government more flexibility on ways they can spend money. And the last one was directing state agencies to put larger amounts of their budget to addressing this crisis. So that's what we saw on the first day. And then this last week, you might have seen that the legislature approved and then the governor signed into law $200 million for housing and homelessness. And I won't go through all this, but you can see what the breakdown was of that $200 million. One thing that's really significant with Governor Kotek is that she's been addressing this as a nonpartisan issue, recognizing that rural or urban or Democrat or Republican, this is a crisis that affects everyone. And she's been really conveying that in her messaging and working with the legislature. And it's a really, really big deal that this passed so early in the session. And it means we can start putting this money towards this, these issues right away. And there's just been really unity around this issue in ways that we have not seen in the state before. So yeah, again, across the board, Governor Kotek, and something that HereTogether has really been emphasizing is that this is an issue that affects all of us. And we, Democrat or Republican, we know that, we want to build a future where homelessness is rare and brief in the Portland region and across the state. All right, this is actually a good spot. We can pause for questions before I get into the roadmap. I kind of gave you all a lot there. So if there's any questions about some of the policies I talked about supportive housing services before we get into what we're advocating for, I'm happy to.
All right. We have a question from Zoom. Joyce, can you come in, please?
Yes, am I unmuted? Yes. I understand, Anna, that the protection for eviction prevention is expiring at the federal level. Is that true also here in Oregon?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all those COVID protections that went into effect for eviction prevention, I think all of them have expired as of January. In January, statewide, there was almost 4,000 evictions in Oregon. And statistically, about 1 in 4 evictions end up with someone becoming unhoused. So yeah, and also, looking back and specifically the Portland region, rent went up 24%. So when we talk about this crisis and people, there's really valid frustration, but like I said, 4,500 folks moved into housing last year. So there's really just this inflow that we have to address in order to talk about this crisis, and recognizing that homelessness is a symptom of poverty. And if we're not addressing that, then we're not going to get anywhere.
We have a question from Friendly House, questioner 1. Trent, come on in.
Very, very near and dear subject to me. I have been experiencing homelessness for over 25 years. And so all of this is stuff I very much pay a lot of attention to. And I hope that what I'm going to be kind of asking and talking about right now is the appropriate time. My personal experience, one of the barriers that I have is that I do not fit the programs that we have. To be more specific, because there's federal funding involved in these housing, I experienced post-traumatic stress disorder after domestic violence trauma. And because I use cannabinoids as the only medicine I have that's healthy for me and that functions to help me medicate my post-traumatic stress disorder, this excludes me from all of the programs that we have now, unless I'm to claim that my cannabis use is an addiction, which I personally refuse to do because it's saving my life. And so I'm caught in this like bubble
Trent, sorry
that
to
there's
interrupt you.
services there, and that we're ramping up these services, but that this is one of the areas that we have where there's this gray zone that leaves a lot of people out.
Okay.
And how is it that we're addressing this in this program? If you have any answers.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I have a specific answer. And I'll just, again, I've been doing this job for a year and a half. I won't pretend I'm an expert, and I really appreciate you being here and listening to me, talk at you with some of the information that I have. Because yeah, there's some really huge barriers, like having to declare something that's helping you medically as an addiction. Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. I don't have a specific answer, but I'd love to chat with you maybe after as well.
Roy from Friendly House.
It's almost the same question. If for the average person that happens to stumble into a shelter, what can they expect? I mean, how is this going to impact them at all?
Yeah, are you talking about SHS and the supportive housing services measure?
Yeah, first off, yeah, if you're on the street at first, how do you know where to go? And 2, when you get there, what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question, because all the shelters, there's shelters that are run by the counties, there's shelters run by the state, there's shelters that are run by service providers. So they're all different. We're huge advocates of low barrier shelters, so no one's turned away at the door. Folks are met with, wherever they're at in life and can get the resources they need. But there's also high barrier shelters out there too that require sobriety and things like that, or don't allow you to have a pet or something. So something that we've always advocated for, again, is making sure that they're low barrier, temporary, trauma informed, and always an on-ramp into housing. And I think you kind of talked a little bit about outreach and stuff like that too. We need to be ramping up outreach, folks that are on the ground, building connections with folks. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but you're asking a great question.
We have a question from our Zoom audience. Kathy Humboldt, come on in.
Hi, I'm going to cheat and ask 2 questions. One is, could you elaborate, please, on what trauma-informed means? And secondly, the gentleman who talked about marijuana, that's legal in Oregon and not legal on a federal basis. Since there's a blending of money in homeless programs from all sorts of levels of government, does that mean that everybody who is served has to meet all federal requirements? Or is there some breakdown between state and federal on requirements?
Okay, so I think I heard the first question was about trauma informed and what that means. That's a great question too. So coming at something with a trauma informed lens is recognizing that people, first of all, meeting people where they're at, recognizing that people are all individual and whatever their story is valid, and we should be addressing the person as a person and not someone as a statistic. And also just recognizing that people have to do really hard things to survive when they're outside and they've been unhoused. And so that's why I think trauma-informed means that like we have folks who are trained in that work, working at a shelter, or someone who's a case manager has that training and background. Also, I'll talk about this a bit too, but having a trauma-informed lens often means the folks that are doing this work have potentially had similar experiences and are able to meet people where they're at because they can come at it with, I've been there, I can talk to you about my experience, and here's what works for me. And, you know, recognizing, yeah, again, that person is a human. So I'll use the term trauma-informed. I think it means a lot of things, but that's a little bit how I think about it. And then the second question, I don't know if I have an answer to. Maybe we can check back in about that at the end as well. Okay. I don't want to give you the wrong information.
We've got a couple more questions. Anna, should we take them?
Yeah, let's do maybe two
Keep
more
going.
and then
Two more? That's what we'll do. Okay, that's what we have too. Dakota's our third questioner here at Friendly House.
Hello, Anna. Portugal as a country faced a very similar problem with a lot of their major cities, and they implemented a basically a very large scale program, but it took them several years to do. So my question is for you guys, do you expect it to be in your roadmap an ongoing thing, or do you have a plan for it to end at a certain period of time within a number of years, give or take?
Yeah, are you specifically talking about the supportive housing services measure?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, as a program in total, but anything that would require that level of funding specifically.
Yeah, it's a great question because the supportive housing services measure is a 10-year measure. I'll say that HereTogether, and I think me specifically, believes in a world where housing is a long-term investment, something that we think about like firefighters or any other kind of service that we kind of haven't, like libraries, things like that. If we think about housing as a long-term investment, something that doesn't end, I think we're not just going to solve homelessness with a $2.5 billion investment at the metro level, because also it's a state thing and also it's a federal thing. So I guess like the policy answer is that the measure does sunset. The goal, I think, would be to renew it based on, what has worked, what hasn't worked with the measure currently. Yeah, hopefully that answered your question. Yeah.
And a final question during this middle questioning is L. Christians on Zoom.
Okay. Yes, I was pleased to hear at the beginning that you work on a 1-year planning cycle. That's great. We a couple of years ago, this huge tax increase or funding increase occurred. When I think $1 billion and 6,000 people homeless, I think, oh, that's enough to solve the problem. But we're 2 years in now, and we don't see any movement, other than still downhill as far as the appearance of the city and the number of eyesores related to homelessness that the typical person encounters traveling through Portland. When will it turn around?
What was it? Sorry, could you?
When will we see improvement in the condition of the city? When will the city's image improve based on all this money that we funded various programs for homelessness with?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're asking a question a lot of people are asking. It's been 2 years, you're right. That's almost 2 years since the money came online, July 2021. I'll have a few things to say, and I think hopefully some of what else I'll get into will sort of answer this. But again, there was no region-wide way to address homelessness previous to the supportive housing services measure. You saw that Clackamas County was only sending $6 million, which sounds like a lot, but like when we're talking about all these different programs, $6 million is not a lot of money previous to SHS. So something just to think about is like all this new funding, as it can be a little bit frustrating, but there's an on-ramp period to making sure this infrastructure is ready to go, making sure that folks across the counties and the different jurisdictions and service providers are talking to each other. Multnomah County was kind of addressing the lion's share of all this, and finally we have funding across all the counties. And also just going back to recognizing this is a decades in the making crisis. This is where we're at now is because of disinvestments that were made 40 years ago. It's not going to take 40 years to address this, but it's going to require all of us to get behind these proven solutions, look at what is expert backed, what is research driven, and hop on board to those solutions. Again, 2 years, it feels frustrating. Like I said, 4,500 people moved into housing last year, but a lot of people are becoming in-housed. And so the prevention is really important. SHS is a huge, critical, game-changing tool, but there's going to have to be, it's going to have to take all of us to be supporting some of the stuff that I'll be talking about in a second.
Go ahead, Anna. I think there'll be more questions at the end.
Okay, great. All right. So we're going to talk about the roadmap. So again, this was developed with support from our 250 member coalition of businesses, service providers, faith leaders, experts working in the field. So there's 4 sections to it, and I'll break it down all by section. But again, I appreciate you noting that, yeah, this is kind of our goal for the year ahead, all these different pieces. If we, we're going to be pushing for all these things. If decision makers take action on these, we see a significant, these are significant ways we can address our region's crisis. We see these as low-hanging fruit that our policymakers can take action on, but it's going to take our advocacy, you all in the room, and I'm going to try and break it down a little bit. If anything seems interesting, we can talk about it during the question portion. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about moving folks from the streets into housing with creative infrastructure and programming. The first piece of this. So the way previous to supportive housing services, the only way in the metro region that someone could get a voucher that was, through a bigger government program was Section 8. And most of us have probably heard about Section 8. But one thing to note is that only 1 in 4 people actually qualify for a Section 8 voucher. They have to take that voucher, go into the private housing market and try to find an apartment. And it only covers 80% of the market rent. So it's really hard to find a voucher that actually, or an apartment or a housing situation that actually fits that voucher. So the Regional Long-Term Rental Assistance, ARLA program, is game-changing because it's locally focused. It was developed with local service providers and culturally specific providers in mind, and it covers up to 125% fair market rent. Individuals who are eligible for the voucher can find a home and landlords get compensated. We're still ramping this up, but again, as you saw, that number of the 9,000 plus folks who have gotten into housing with the voucher, that's through ARLA. And we're trying to really push for this to continue to ramp up because it's life-changing. Folks who are waiting lists for Section 8, I think Tanya was on a waiting list for 8 years before getting an ARLA voucher this last year. So on top of that, another great thing that we can do with ARLA is we can pair it with affordable housing developments, which is new. Section 8 doesn't do this. It helps the vouchers go further on top of housing bonds. So it'll pair a project-based voucher with affordable housing bonds, and it makes that unit permanently affordable. So even if someone leaves, that unit, someone can move back in and it's still permanently affordable for the life of the measure. It covers so it works a little bit differently than Section 8 in that someone has to pay just 28% of their income, and SHS takes care of the rest of the cost of the unit. So in the Portland metro region, this is going to be a scary number. We are short 68,000 affordable housing units. That doesn't mean we're short physically 68,000 units. It means that 60,000 units short of people paying an affordable rate, which is defined as 30% of your income or less. So in the Portland region, it's 20,000. We need to be continuing to ramp up these affordable housing development, the new housing that's permanently affordable, but also we need to be thinking about creative options like housing that's already out there, or ways to turn existing infrastructure into transitional housing. One really great way that the state is addressing this is through Project Turnkey. So that's taking existing motels and hotels and turning them into transitional shelter, which is really critical because congregate shelters can be really overwhelming and don't work for a lot of people. So a hotel has infrastructure already for someone to be able to lock the door, have their own space, and basically the Oregon legislature is working with local jurisdictions to purchase hotels at a low cost, have that jurisdiction own it and be able to use it as transitional housing. And Project Turnkey's actually increased the state's shelter capacity by 20%. So I was really excited because about 2 weeks ago, they've been able to say that we helped pass a victory in this space. In February, the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners voted 3-2 to approve a purchase of a motel, the Quality Inn in Southeast Sunnyside, and convert it into transitional housing. This is great because they actually were already using it as a shelter, but they were paying a nightly market rate, about $3 million a year, for folks who are unhoused to be able to stay in that space. It's a lot of families too that are staying in the Quality Inn. And basically through Project Turnkey, they would have been able to just buy it outright and spend a lot less money and be able to own the hotel and have people use that as transitional housing. But last week, because of politics in Clackamas County, Chair Tootie Smith rescinded her vote, canceling the project, and like I said, costing Clackamas County $3 million annually because they're already doing this. So it's frustrating. We're trying to figure out what's going on there. We did it took way more organizing than it should have to even have gotten us to the point where they did approve it. And then in a potentially illegal move, she rescinded her vote last week. So we're going to continue to be advocating for transitional housing in Clackamas County. That money doesn't go away, which is good. It will go to another county in the state to do transitional housing, but it was going to provide 110 units of transitional housing. So let's see what else. So yeah, like I said, we need to be exploring creative opportunities. So scaling up eviction prevention and short-term rental assistance. One thing that's a little bit exciting that cities across the country are considering is office space conversions. So as more and more folks, have worked at home, there's all this office space like in downtown areas that could potentially be converted into affordable housing. And there's ways that cities can incentivize that development to happen. There's actually been a win in Portland on this. Last week or 2 weeks ago, Portland City Council voted to approve 2 code changes to streamline converting office spaces. And so that's been, really exciting. On March 15th, they approved 2 code changes to make it a lot easier to streamline office conversions. And there's developers who are talking now about converting a few different office buildings downtown into housing. It's not as easy as you can imagine as converting like a hotel because, putting in bathrooms and, cooking units and things like that. But it's infrastructure that's already there. So it's definitely faster than building a whole new building. So there's exciting things happening. We're continuing to advocate on that work. So another, creative thing that we've been talking about is streamlining, removing barriers to housing and employment. Has anyone here heard of a homeless court program? It's similar to like a drug court. There's been cities in California that have done this, but if someone who is unhoused and is charged with something, oftentimes folks who are unhoused, we call them crimes of survival because folks are forced into situations that make it really difficult to survive. And so there's opportunity that we've been pushing for in the metro region. There's some exciting movement on this to make it so that folks can, instead of, if they were supposed to be doing community service time, they could count their like housing search or working with a caseworker towards those community service hours. So if we can get folks into housing and stabilize, it's just a really critical way to be addressing some of these issues. Okay, so that was section 1 was long. I promise the other sections won't be as long. We're going to talk about the workforce. This is something that I'm personally incredibly passionate about. I think that it's kind of like this hidden thing that we don't talk about enough, but a lot of folks who are working on addressing this crisis are also struggling themselves. I know plenty of caseworkers who are on food stamps or using rental vouchers themselves. A lot of these folks also transitioned out of experiencing homelessness. Dahl Crane was someone who works at one of our favorite nonprofits in the coalition. They're all favorites. That's why I was laughing. At Cultivate Initiatives. She was a gym teacher in Portland and through a series of events became unhoused for 10 years. Got connected to Cultivate Initiatives, is now their intern coordinator. She's currently being housed through a pilot program that Multnomah County has. But other than that, isn't at this point able to potentially afford some of the things she needs to live. And so we need hundreds of folks like Doll across the region, and we need to make sure that they're getting compensated properly in order to address this crisis. And there's a huge workforce shortage. So when we're talking, someone was asking about outreach. We just don't have enough folks able to do outreach because there's not necessarily the right amount of funding to be paying people what they deserve, and also the training piece of it as well, ramping up training for folks so that they are trauma informed and ready to, go do that really difficult frontline work that we, it's literally essential to ending this crisis. Salma is another one of caseworkers who works at transition projects. She has lived experience. She's able to work with people and say, I know you can do this because I've been there. A good example of ramping up the frontline workforce pipeline is a program that's happening in Washington County that just started with SHS funding. It's providing career opportunities and training for folks with lived experience of homelessness or housing instability, specifically folks who are queer or BIPOC folks. So we're able to meet people where they're at. Disproportionate amount of folks who are unhoused are BIPOC or in the queer community. And so folks who have been there with that experience can meet people where they're at. It's really exciting. There's one cohort right now, but they're about to expand it to 3 more. And it's creating more workforce inflow for housing services system in Washington County. And while building a more representative workforce. A big piece of this is centering equity in contracting. Like I said, disproportionately folks who are queer or BIPOC are represented in the houseless community. So a piece of a way that we can center equity, this is going to get a little wonky for a second, but we really need to update the way that we do contracting. So previously, it's been that a service provider asks for funding from the county through such a program like supportive housing services, and they work on a reimbursement model. So they have to do that work and then get reimbursed by the county. This is really difficult for big nonprofits that might have a little bit of reserve funding, and it's nearly impossible for new mutually aid-focused nonprofits. And so Multnomah County is doing just switching this up. We're working on the other counties to make it so that, we can be changing this. The Regional Oversight Committee, which is the oversight committee of SHS, is taking this up as an issue. And right now, like I said, Multnomah County is allowing contractors to get 2 months of operating capital ahead of time. So some of this wonkier stuff is really the nitty gritty of why we're not able to address some of this crisis. Right, so improving efficiency through better coordination and streamlined processes. Sorry, I just want to make sure I have this. So we're establishing rules for SHS carryover funds for year 1 and beyond. So there's the way that what's happening with SHS is reported out to the public. There's these quarterly reports. It's kind of the regional clearinghouse for information on this. These are a couple of ways that we've made some wins in this. Again, a little bit wonky, but really important for this information of what's happening to be shared out with the community. And also making sure that we're streamlining, all this, again, historic funding. If there's any carryover funds from the year previously, making sure that that's put into the work that we're doing in the next year, and making sure that we're communicating what's happening with the public. And we also need to be really, making sure people transitioning from homelessness are transitioning into housing, and we're not missing some of the quote unquote, what's called hardest to house people from getting lost in the system. Common spaces for this are folks who are aging out of foster care or healthcare or the prison system, making sure that we're, not discharging folks directly into houselessness. Rachel's an example of this. She actually just moved into housing in Tigard last year after 8 years of homelessness and having experienced time in some of these systems. And with SHS funding, she was able to get connected to a new service provider and get stabilized in housing in Tigard. This is another exciting / wonky thing, but something that we're preparing for is in 2024, there's going to be a new Medicaid waiver rollout, which is going to allow federal healthcare funds to be put towards housing and healthcare. So housing, healthcare, deeply interconnected. if a service provider can bill some of their services to Medicaid, this is going to be incredibly just another great way that we can be pairing these systems together. This is one of our other great service providers in Washington County, Central Cultural. Counties need to be talking to the service providers doing this critical on the ground work. Counties, we were working with the counties to call on continuous engagement with the service providers that are doing the on the ground services. And one thing HereTogether is facilitating is, working groups and roundtable discussions with the counties and with service providers so that they can be talking and making sure that, again, this funding is streamlined and being used in the most effective way. Okay, this is the last one. Ramping up data collection, integration, and reporting. Again, I just want to emphasize that previous to SHS, the counties were not talking to each other, but homelessness, there's no county lines. Someone could become unhoused in Multnomah County, but looking for a job in Washington County. And the service providers, the counties weren't talking to each other. So as much as we can have kind of that overlap is incredibly important. One of the ways we're doing this is through Built for Zero. Just curious, has anyone here heard of Built for Zero? A couple folks. So Built for Zero is a methodology that's been implemented in other cities across the country. It's being spearheaded by a nonprofit called Community Solutions. And it's basically just another tool in the toolbox on how we can address some of this data stuff. Built for Zero, there's different tools within Built for Zero that we can use. A big piece of this is a by name list. So we're understanding who is unhoused and why, and making sure that we're convening care coordinated tables to help people who are unhoused in a better way than we have right now. Some of those examples are regularly updated dashboards, easy to use data entry systems, and investing in mobile data entry devices. And that's like a wonky way to say, like, what if a service provider had an iPad and they had that information more regularly updated across all the counties so we could understand if someone's been connected in this program versus that program and being able to overlap. Because again, if we're talking about someone who's, in a tent, maybe they got help to get an ID through one service provider, but then in a sweep, they lost that ID. If there's a way that can be, they are kind of in that survival mode, if there's a way that service providers can be talking to each other and making sure that that person's needs are met, this is just another way we can be doing that. On the left here is another nonprofit we work with called Portland Street Medicine. They do outreach. They're pretty wonderful. So we need to ensure that our healthcare industries and housing people and housing service providers are responding together and addressing this crisis in coordination. Like I say on here, by mapping and integrating current regional information systems, state agencies should always be integrating state information technology systems that are interacting with houselessness. And finally, again, quarterly SHS reports are the window into accountability for what's happening with SHS. This is something that HereTogether, again, we're non-governmental. We want to see SHS succeed, and we want to communicate what is happening and what is not working with the public. And so we've been doing a lot of organizing and advocacy around making sure that the communications to the public is streamlined. So previous to this year, it was the ways that the counties were reporting their successes were very different. For example, like Washington County was reporting only the year-round shelter beds, but Clackamas was reporting their emergency shelter beds and their year-round shelter beds. So it's really confusing at first to, what is actually happening. And good news, there's a lot more coordination now within the last couple quarters. And that's something we're going to continue to ramp up. And, eventually we want to have a regularly updated dashboard more than once a quarter. All right. Again, this is the stuff that we're working on just this year. This is the low-hanging fruit that we're going to be advocating for. Some of it a little wonkier than others, but all this, helps to address this really complex crisis that we're facing. Thank you all for listening to me get through that. I'm excited to hear your questions, and we can get into it a little bit more.
Trying to keep track. I've got a question from the Zoom audience. This is a question from Nada. When I was I'm speaking for her, when I was homeless at age 50, there was no services available for me because I was not elderly, had no addictions, no dependents, no medical or mental issues, was not escaping domestic violence. Have the requirements to get support changed?
Yeah, I'm really glad you bring that question up because that's the way that HUD defines who is unhoused. There's basically, if you go and try and get services through anything that's state or federally funded, previous to the supportive housing services measure, you have to fill out this long questionnaire, as this is my understanding, and you get kind of ranked based on all these different, things that might lead you to becoming unhoused. And if you don't meet certain requirements, then you don't get services because there was a lack of, enough funding to really address it. And so the requirements, those federal funded things, the way that you entered into that system is still there from my understanding. But finally, there's more money to actually address it. And so people can get help a lot more quickly through the different service providers, and continuing to ramp that up. One thing that we're trying to advocate for, all 3 of the counties underspent their budgets last year. Not good. What was that? Yeah, the last 2 years, exactly. So part of that has to do with infrastructure. Part of that has to do with, they have all this money that they are still trying to figure out how to get out there for the folks that are the hardest to house. It's a lot quicker to get money into a voucher because that's just stabilizing someone who's already in a house. But someone who's on the street, there's a lot more services that that person might need. So I kind of got a little rambly there, but hopefully that answered the question.
We have question 4 from Friendly House.
So I've become sort of more interested in criticisms a little bit of safety nets. I think the 2 main criticisms are that at some point they enable dependency as opposed to creating independence, and that they kind of cause the problem to move around more than solving the problem, kind of like the inverse of, say, a police sweep, which just pushes the problem somewhere else. Spending more and more money on something like brings people in, maybe. So I think so the 2 questions I have then, I guess, are it seems to me homelessness in Portland has increased more than the national average. And so that can't be explained.
You need to ask your question, please.
Well, I'm getting there. So that can't be explained by federal cuts and national cuts. So assuming that perception is true and that Portland has always had historically a strong safety net, why has our homelessness problem increased more than the national average?
Thank you.
And then supposing that Portland spends a lot more money per capita on homelessness than, say, Spokane, how can you tell that won't just cause, homelessness to move from Spokane to Portland as opposed to actually solving homelessness?
Yes, you have 2 questions there. And you're asking big questions. Those are good questions.
Supposing Portland spends a lot more money than Spokane on homelessness, how can you tell that will actually reduce homelessness rather than just causing it to move from some portion of it to move from Spokane to Portland? In other words, if I'm homeless and living in Spokane and I can get more support in Portland, why wouldn't I just move? And that wouldn't really reduce homelessness globally.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things there. One, the perception that homelessness has increased in Portland. I think that it has, and it's not from the data that we have, it's not significantly different than other cities along the West Coast. Portland, first and foremost, is in a housing crisis, and that we have to approach talking about homelessness from that perspective. Again, we're short 68,000 units across the Portland metro region, and that has a lot to do with folks moving to Portland who have high incomes and are able to afford higher priced homes. And then everybody else, along the path down is priced out of, affordable homes. And so there's that piece of it that I don't think that Portland, from the data that we have, has increased any more than Seattle or other cities along the West Coast. I think Portland has become a communications scapegoat for this crisis. I think that we've been used as sort of like a punching bag there's a lot of reasons why homelessness has become very political. There's a lot of incentives for people at a national level to point at Portland and say, look at those, ways that they're addressing this. That's clearly not working, when it's not necessarily any different than other places. One thing I always also like to talk about is that, you look at a place like West Virginia, they have some of the highest rates of drug use and addiction, and they also have some of the lowest rates of homelessness. And then you look at somewhere like Portland, where we have really high rates of homelessness, and clearly it has to do more with the housing stock than anything else. On top of everything else you're saying, I don't know how to necessarily get into the safety net, because I think we have to look at it locally and seeing what's happening here and addressing folks. Again, going back to those individualized services, but I think we're recognizing that first and foremost, we're in a housing crisis, and what is happening in Portland is very different than what's happening in Spokane because of the way the housing development has worked.
Thank you, Anna. We have a question from Friendly House, questioner 5. Can you come up to the mic? Questioner 5?
Yeah, thank you. My question is similar to the last one. Since homelessness doesn't really know any state boundaries, what commitment or interest is there at the federal level for reducing homelessness?
That's a good question. We would hope that it would be higher. I mean, I just always go back to, again, like, this is modern homelessness looks the way it does because of federal disinvestments 40 years ago, and we're being kind of forced to address it at a state and local level. The resources that we have from the federal government, like Section 8, clearly are not going far enough. We could get into what our government spending its money on, but I think they should be doing more. The federal government definitely should, because going back to your point, honestly, if we're not addressing this across nationwide, then people are going to be, have to move to places where resources, service providers are, rather than being able to stay in the places they want to stay in. So it has to address not just at the local level, but statewide as well, which is why that that funding from Governor Kotek is really exciting, because there's actually a huge portion of that will be addressing rural homelessness. So people are able to stay in the communities they want to stay in and not come to a bigger city like Portland, potentially.
We have a question from Kay Byerly on the Zoom audience. Because of mental illness, are there many homeless people who refuse to be housed?
I think that's a huge myth, is that there are people that don't want to get into housing. And I think that that's something that gets sensationalized. I feel like, I know that there was a news media clip that went out a few weeks ago through K2, where they interviewed a woman who said that being unhoused in Portland was incredibly easy. They didn't, that got shared like at a national level, and it didn't really share the clip where someone else went and re-interviewed her, and she had been caught on a bad day and taken out of context. And so I think that there's like maybe a few stories of people who are in that place and maybe want to stay there, but the vast majority of people want to get into housing. Of course, mental health has to be addressed. SHS goes towards mental health as well. One thing that we don't talk about enough, though, is that a lot of people who, for a series of events, such as like something, medical debt or something, they become unhoused, and mental health or drug addiction becomes much more of an issue once you're surviving on the street than it would have been if you were in housing and didn't get there.
Thank you, Anna. We have a question number 6 at Friendly House.
Hi, I've just wondered, you showed at the very beginning the number of what the counties had said were the number of homeless people unhoused and everything. It seemed to me that it was skewed. And is there because Multnomah County had just so many more than Washington County. I know the I'm not sure of the difference in population levels between the two, but it seems that Washington County is pretty big now. So why do you think that is skewed?
Yeah, I think
or is it skewed?
It is. I don't think it's skewed. I think that it's just a reflection of the population, because Multnomah County has this Portland, which has, I think Portland's population now at 1 million. So Multnomah County definitely just has more folks in it. So more on houselessness.
Our next questioner, question 7 or the 7. Okay.
Hi, you were talking about that this is a 40-year-old problem, or at least many of the problems have happened for a long time. What were the decisions made 40 years ago that changed this?
Yeah, I glossed over that, didn't I? The biggest disinvestment was by the Reagan administration to stop investing in public housing. So again, it just goes back to housing being, or homelessness being, a symptom of poverty and a housing crisis issue. There was a lot of social services safety nets that were cut as well. But the biggest one definitely was a lack of publicly funded housing that people could access at affordable rates. And then also, if we really just look at it, the health inequality gap has increased tremendously in the last 40 years. What's the word? How much people are, minimum wage has also not increased at a significant level. Inflation went up by 10% in the last year. So again, when we think there's incredibly valid frustration, still seeing a crisis on our streets. And also there's huge impacts of poverty that are not making this any easier. And if we don't address wealth inequality, we're not going anywhere.
A question from Joyce on Zoom. What can be done about sweeps destroying people's paperwork?
Great question. Yeah, sweeps are incredibly traumatizing. Like you were saying, they push people from one place to the other. HereTogether is definitely advocating, not in any way advocating for sweeps, definitely recognizing all these other things I listed are much better ways to be helping folks into stability. So I think to answer that question is probably just stop sweeps.
A questioner 8 at Friendly House, please come on. Could you say your name, please?
Hi, my name is Marshall. I actually have 2 questions. The first one is, can I spend 1 minute answering Ben's question?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm working homeless and I'm in Portland because I heard it's nice and I can't afford to live here. So I want to crystallize this phrase for you guys. I heard it's nice in Portland, but I can't afford it. I heard it's nice in Seattle, but I can't afford it. I heard it's nice in Austin, but I can't afford it. Those are the last 3 cities I've been to. Okay, and that's why they're here. It's because they heard it's nice, just heard, word of mouth usually between homeless people, and they can't afford it. It sounds like you're addressing the first problem. Oh, sorry, the second part, the can't afford it. So my second question is, what are you doing about the I heard it's nice? Are you preventing people from being shamed out or giving them a place to be if they are?
I think I got your question. Yeah, thank you for, I really appreciate the open dialogue. And again, I've been at this work for 1.5 years. I'm still learning a lot. So I appreciate trying to break down some of these complex issues. One thing I'll say is that from the point in time count that they did in January of last year, 90% of people that were currently unhoused in Portland were previously housed in Multnomah County. So it's not like people are coming here from all over the state pouring into Multnomah County resources. Some folks are, right? And every single one of those folks deserves the resources, and stability and housing and safety. A lot of those folks also in that 10% are from other parts of Oregon. So I don't know if I answered your question. The folks that are doing work, I would say, folks that are deeply invested in homelessness, I haven't met anyone who's trying to shame anyone out of trying to get housing here.
Okay, your people address the end result of homelessness. Now, what about the causes of homelessness? Are you coordinating with educators and employers and government officials and healthcare providers about how to maybe educate, telling your experiences and your statistics, telling them this is what we're working with. How can we keep on how can we stem the inflow of homelessness?
Yeah, it's a great question. Also, I love your t-shirt. One thing that we try and do, so our HereTogether, the nonprofit, is actually a really small team. There's myself as the communications manager. We have 2 co-directors, and we have administration specialists. So we're a small team, but we try to do stuff like this a lot, going out into the community and trying to talk to folks. I know you're specifically asking more, how are we talking to other systems? HereTogether's work is definitely niche. Like we're trying to work on supportive housing services. I think organizing and advocacy works best when us as, team that we have is trying to address specifically this problem, but it doesn't mean that we're working actively against any of the upstream stuff like you talked about. I think the best way we do that is through advocating for preventative services like rental vouchers. But you bring up a great point of we have to be talking about all of it.
And I have a I have a question. As a citizen of Oregon who is housed, I have seen homelessness has affected me in that I go to Portland, I walk by people that are sleeping on the street. I've walked by a man whose toes haunt me because they were black and I'm a medical professional and I walked by. I've seen businesses close that I've loved. I've heard Michael Allen Harris, who does the 10 Grands concert, can no longer, he used to have he'd fill the snits for that concert in 48 hours and now he can't sell all the tickets and has decided this will be the last year that they'll do this concert in Portland. And I'm breaking my own rule. I'm telling the story. Somebody tell me to stop. Now I'm so sorry. I'm gonna ask how the citizens of Oregon, how do we help?
I love that question because if we just sit and point fingers at other people, we're not going to get anywhere, right? I think people, again, going back to that frustration, it's valid because many folks are paying, taxes into addressing this crisis. And also it's going to take more than just the money. We have to all be behind these proven solutions. So I kind of got into some of the wonky things. Again, just like as much as we can be all together behind stuff that the experts are saying, as much as we can be invested in caring for the folks in our community on a day-to-day basis, that one-on-one, care and compassion. The compassion fatigue, I think, is very real for a lot of folks. It's really hard to see someone who's struggling, who's unhoused, and it makes us feel frustrated. And we want to aim and point fingers, and that's valid. And also, we're gonna have to recognize this will be a continuous investment in our community, is caring for these folks. And so overall, like I said, kind of coming together behind all these things. And also, one concrete way is staying invested in HereTogether's work. So I can share, we've got a newsletter, we've got all our social media. There's tons of ways that folks can get in on action alerts and ways to advocate for all the stuff that I talked about. Because it's going to take more than just HereTogether, our small team advocating for this. It's going to take folks in the community who are caring and compassionate about these issues and about the solutions, advocating for them.
So what I'm hearing is go on the website and find out what you can do.
Yeah, and I can even share it with you and you can share it with the membership as well. We send out action alert emails and things like that, and are deeply invested in this policy advocacy. There's lots of other ways to be doing this work too, volunteering your time and things, and we share those out as well.
Okay. Oh, Jules.
First of all, thank you for your good work and your very positive outlook on seems like an insurmountable problem. And I do appreciate that. But I heard recently a statistic that in the year of 2022, 525 homeless people died. And the cause of death was not elaborated on. And what came to mind was hypothermia. I mean, I'm in a warm bed at night and I'm thinking of somebody on the street. I don't care how many tents they have or whatever. It's freezing. And they're not. Now, is that number true? Have we lost over 500 people living in the streets? And what was the major cause of their demise?
Yeah, I think there's some statistic as well that if someone's unhoused, their life expectancy goes in half. Well, yeah, it's 9 years. So someone who's on the street, I mean, I think the domicile report from 2021 was around 100. So I'm not sure where the 500 number comes from, but that could be over like a certain period of years. The numbers, whatever, these are real people, right? So any one death is a tragedy. I don't know the causes always. I think you're right. Exposure to the elements. I mean, it's just like, it's traumatic when you're surviving outside. And so I don't know. Yeah, to answer your question, I don't exactly know what the causes of death are, but any one of them, like I said, is something to be addressing.
Can I squeeze in one quick one, Helen?
Ask a question. If it's a
Okay. There's also a movement afoot to add another tax
question
that would subsidize lawyers.
Jules, it's got to be a question.
Okay. The tax that will subsidize lawyers who will act for the eviction people to defend them. And the general feeling of the public so far has been not another tax. What's your sense of how to go about that?
I think that's is that the eviction representation tax?
Yes.
Measure?
Exactly.
Yeah. HereTogether doesn't have an official position on it. I think it's worth, if you haven't heard about that, it's worth looking into, because as much as we can be preventing eviction, again, that cost is so much less than someone who's already unhoused getting into housing. So.
Okay.
Have an official position.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My working age was with high tech and the time when it was easy to get a job. If I applied, I got the job. Most of the jobs, though, that I got, well, when I came to retiring, I realized I didn't really have enough money. And it was only by pure luck that I happened to get into a job that had a good retirement. And those are rare. I'm wondering if there's, this is a federal problem, I would think, that because when you're making big money, you want to spend it. You don't think about retirement. And then when I got into my 70s and realized I had to retire and that the knowledge base I had no longer applied, I was really worried.
Go ahead, Roy, ask your question.
Well, is there something afoot to get people to invest in their retirement so that they don't end up homeless?
I mean, it's a good question. I'm 26, so I'm personally terrified about what it's going to look like when I'm maybe able to retire. I don't know. So yeah, it's a good question. I think we're seeing a huge amount of folks who are seniors now who are becoming unhoused because of exactly what you're talking about. There's some great nonprofits in our coalition, like Northwest Pilot Project, that work with low-income seniors. There was a recent win in Tigard where seniors at an apartment complex were able to advocate. They were all living in an affordable housing complex that had a 30-year sunset, and no one was told about it. It came up, and so they were all about to be evicted. And this group of seniors in Washington County did some great organizing. They lobbied Washington County Council, and they just had a win last week, which is great. This just comes to mind. So anyways, I'm going on a tangent. You're asking a really important question, and there's some advocacy around that, but I think you're right. It's got to be happening at the federal level. So.
We have one final question. Yeah. It's got a question mark at your first sentence.
Okay. So Jesus tells us, he says, all right, what you do to the least of these, you do unto me. It's the same thing. So what you guys are doing is a really, really great thing. And Reinhold Niebuhr says that any justice that is only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. So I have a challenge for you guys, because a lot of the concern is that, like you said, it's not just a one layer problem. You have to come at it from several different angles. And one of those angles, which is necessary to mention in any conversation about homelessness, one of those questions, though, is basically is a sociological question: is how people get here and how they stay there. And a lot of times, drugs is what keeps people homeless in some cases. And my question is is if you guys are prepared for the possibility that what you're doing, which is great work with the housing and everything, might be necessary but not sufficient, because Oregon is the only state in the U.S. which has decriminalized many hard drugs, which is part of the reason that a lot of people are unable to get, even when they're housed, rehab is something that has to happen once you're there as well. and it's not a mystical act. My question is, are you guys prepared for the possibility that it won't just take getting people into houses, but it'll also take a few different things? Because if so, you're going to end up spending more money by attacking the wrong target.
Yeah, I mean, it's housing first, it's not housing only. And that's, yeah, we want to re-emphasize that supportive housing services goes towards rental vouchers, but it also goes towards addiction and mental health treatment. And that is a huge piece of what we're trying to do. I think when people think about housing first, they think about it as, oh, just put someone in an apartment. You're good, they're good to go. That's not necessarily for someone that might not be all that they need. But recognizing that getting someone stable with a roof over their head and a safe place to sleep has to be a piece of the rehabilitation. And you can't, I mean, it's wild for me to think that people have to earn housing when they're surviving on the streets and have to deal with mental health and addiction with a safe place to sleep. And so I think to answer your question, we definitely believe in housing as a piece of the puzzle, a big piece of it. We have to address affordable housing issues as well as mental health and addiction things. And SHS goes towards that, which is really exciting. And we didn't have those resources before. And so this is good stuff.
Anna, thank you. We're going to have to close now. We do have afterthoughts if you want to stay on.